Republican has absolutely no business winning whatsoever, and frankly, that race is neck and neck, and I don't see Democrats right now running over to actually want that guy to actually win right now.
But with that being said, though, I mean, you have to look at the other New York seat that we had a special election in with Hochul, and Hochul won steadily against the Republicans, which is a Republican seat that we picked up.
You had 3 people running in that race.
Well, I really think it was more so about the fact that there was a whole Medicare debate, and the Republicans have made it clear that they're willing to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and education, and there's a lot of people that aren't about that.
You had 3 people running in that race, and it actually split the vote. People can say that it was Medicare. Frankly, you had a spoiler in that race, and I don't think it had a whole lot to do with Medicare as much as Democrats want to say otherwise.
You know, one of the things about New York, the New York climate, everyone knows that New York is so, especially Manhattan, and which is, I think, the area that, Anthony Weiner would have been, around in, Manhattan, Queens, the 5 boroughs. Everyone knows it's heavily Democratic. I mean, everyone knows. In fact, I think it's so Democratic that most Republicans just kind of stay home. What would happen in a situation like this? I mean, you couldn't predict this, but now that it's upon you, it's here. What happens now if a Democrat has to step down, is not the incumbent competing, and then the Republicans come into with a very strong candidate? Would now the closet Republicans kind of come out of the woodwork? I mean, Carrie, is that a possibility, or is that just a pipe dream for Republicans?
Well, I think that if the Republican actually pulls this race off, this is going to be quite a symbolic win, at least for the Republicans, to say, ooh, looks like the Democrats are in trouble, because if the Democrats can't even bring out their base for a seat that Anthony Weiner and Democrats before him were winning, then I would say that the Democrats are really in trouble. More importantly, what we see here, anytime as far as the Democrats were concerned, we're talking about, stimulus funding, green jobs, that's what we're talking about. And then they find out that Solyndra, a company that went bankrupt that the president was touting back in May of 2010, that's the vision of the future. That's the vision of a prosperity went bankrupt. Then I have a feeling that the president and the Democrats are going to have a real problem on their hands, because if that's their jobs plan, then I have a feeling that the president should probably be thinking of another jobs plan in the future.
Richard, the whole Solyndra problem is the company that had the stimulus money and then now just filed for bankruptcy. Obviously, it's not good for the company, but the problem is that even if it's just an aberration in the terms of the whole issue, perception is reality. So what does this do then for presidents talk about jobs and how you create jobs and stimulus and all that other thing?
Well, I think you're right. I think perception is reality, Lauren. And the president is facing. He's definitely facing tough challenges. But I think what we've seen from the stimulus package, we've seen that there's not, like I said earlier, there's people aren't willing to work with the president. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, he's our president universally in this country. And I think people aren't willing to work with him, and that's the problem. A case in point is what happened in Florida about 5 or 6 months back. Under Governor Charlie Crist, they were going to build a high-speed rail that went from Orlando to Tampa. Under the new governor, he basically he scrapped the plans to build a high-speed rail, taking $3 or $4 billion out of Florida's economy, which is why Florida's unemployment is so high. On top of that, the simple fact is that this high-speed rail would have paid for itself. It wasn't like the state of Florida would not have put up cash to pay for this high-speed rail, but yet, in order to play politics, they were willing to put the high-speed rail and jobs on the back burner so they can play politics with the president. And that's the problem in Washington. Democrats and Republicans are both guilty of it. It's not about playing politics. It's about really bipartisan solutions to solving America's issues. It's not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. Jobs is an American issue.
Yeah, I understand the jobs issue is an American issue, and I also understand the idea of politics. That one of the problems is that when the president says we have to have a balanced approach, it tends to mean that the Republicans have to, acquiesce. And that's one of the big issues. I mean, Carrie, do you agree or not agree with that?
Well, certainly. Anytime we hear the issue of acquiescing or compromising, usually it means the other side has to give up, obviously, a whole lot. But anytime, very often, I hear that we have to put more money into jobs. Very often, say conservatives or say Republicans, they usually translate that as putting more money into, say, union jobs or, say, temporary jobs or shovel-ready jobs. It's very hard to accept that as we have to, say, start putting tax relief into, say, the private sector. And that's not exactly something that Barack Obama is actually thinking about. He's actually thinking about putting more money into the union coffers more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, who would be better, though, Carrie, for sort of a jobs creation? We were talking about Boehner is going to give the speech next week about his plan, but Rick Perry, who from all of the candidates in the GOP, probably has the most extensive record about creating jobs, but even that has a sort of negative connotation with many more of the far-right Republicans. Who really of the Republicans has a good handle on jobs creation?
Well, certainly, Mitt Romney likes to tout himself as a kind of businessman who has certainly created jobs to a certain extent. Herman Cain likes to tout himself as a businessman who has created jobs within his own experience as the CEO of Godfather's Pizza. But at this point, I've always been one to say that the people who have actually created jobs has been the American people, those who have been those who have created businesses. It has been the politicians who have simply left businesses alone.
Yeah. One of the things about Rick Perry, I mean, he's got a steady record of this creating the jobs, and a lot of people criticize how he's created it with this job creation funds. That's part of his success in creating jobs in Texas. But one of the problems that people have cited with Rick Perry is that can he play on the big stage? Can he create the same kind of programs on the national level where, he attracted a lot of trying to attract businesses to Texas, but now you got a whole country that needs jobs, not just Texas, not just a few states. How is he going to do that? And I mean, is that kind of the issue for Perry?
Well, you know what, Lauren? There was a very interesting piece in the New York Post about a week or two ago. There was someone who was actually a doctor who I believe was a doctor who wrote a piece saying that the tort reform laws over in Texas are much better than the tort reform laws over in New York. And the reason why a number of doctors are moving from New York into Texas is because there's less of a chance of those doctors being sued all the time, and the higher premiums in New York are simply just not as manageable as they are over in Texas, and that doctors can actually make a better living over in Texas as opposed to New York, and so which is why you're seeing more people leaving New York and going to other states like Texas, as opposed to staying in New York, and the taxes are actually lower in states like Texas as opposed to New York. So I think that's what places like Texas and are actually benefiting from right now.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, the idea that Rick Perry has a great Texas record, and is this going to be the chink in his armor that they can attack him on these issues that are not quite as solid for the nation as they were for Texas?
Well, I think in this next Republican debate, what you'll see other members of the GOP field attack him for the fact that a lot of the jobs that he created in Texas were government jobs. And not only the fact that he created government jobs, a lot of the jobs he created were minimum wage jobs with no health care benefits. He was one of the few governors to take stimulus dollars from the White House or from Washington. So he is, just as, I guess you're culpable to Obama's stimulus packages failures than anybody else's. But if not, I think Rick Perry is a glowing success of how Obama's stimulus packages work to create jobs if the money is used effectively. So I'll give him praise for the fact that he took Obama's stimulus dollars and he created jobs. But going forward, I think we're really going to have a really hard conversation in this country about revenue and about compromise. Sadly, I think compromise has been sort of, in the current situation that we're in, that the president has given a lot and the Democrats have given a lot. We haven't seen the Republicans give anything. We're willing to make cuts. We're willing to come to the table and have a conversation. But at the same time, you can't make cuts without having a conversation about revenue. And if we close some of the loopholes that exist for the millionaires and billionaires, for oil companies, for corporate jet owners, then will be steps in the right direction. And what I think what we'll see with the super committee in October is just that. We've seen a lot of people like Pat Toomey say that he's willing to talk about tax reform. So they're warming up to the fact that we have to have a conversation about tax reform.
Richard, I will continue with you, but Carrie has to go. I want to give her the last word before we have to say goodbye to her. Carrie.
Oh my gosh, the scary corporate jet owners. Oh my goodness. Keep in mind the corporate jet owners also have the jet makers who also have people who actually make those jets. Remember back in the 1980s when there was a huge tax that were actually put on yacht makers, and then what happened? The yacht companies actually had to lay off workers. Those were actually working class people. Don't forget that. So, frankly, I find it very funny that even if you were to tax every single millionaire that was out in the United States, our problems wouldn't actually be solved. I'd like to point that out.
Okay, Carrie Pickett, staff writer for Washington Times, coming to us from our D.C. bureau. Thank you very much for your input today. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Sure thing, guys.